I remember when I first heard the rhyme as a child. It terrified me. To me, the crooked man was some sort of boogeyman with freakishly long arms and legs that were twisted and broken in horrifying ways. I still have the rhyme memorized. It repeats in my brain like a skipping record. There was a crooked man, and he walked a crooked mile. He found a crooked sixpence against a crooked stile. He bought a crooked cat which caught a crooked mouse, and they all lived together in a little crooked house. My brother Benton, who loved to torture me as a child, ended up adding his own parts to the rhyme over time. The extra parts he added did nothing to console me or end my nightmares of this twisted boogeyman who always seemed to slink through the shadows. I remember the rhyme Benton told me by heart to this day. The crooked man watches you. His eyes are black, his lips are blue. The crooked man twists and crawls. He uses his crooked blade to kill. And when the curtain of night falls, he comes to get his thrill. So, I found it strange when, a few weeks ago, I was sitting with a couple of my friends drinking, and the subject of the crooked man came up again. They were rambling about shootings and serial killers and other fairly interesting subjects that I knew almost nothing about. But my friend Iris knew everything about such morbid subjects. She was a small drink of water, no more than 5 feet, with platinum blonde hair and green eyes like a cat. She was extremely attractive with high cheekbones and a small nose and chin. She always talked extremely fast and made violent slashing gestures with her hands. Sometimes I wondered if she had a secret amphetamine habit I didn't know about. "But did you hear about the murders in Union?" Iris asked, glancing over at her boyfriend Ben. Ben was the opposite of Iris. Tall and nerdy with thick, black-rimmed glasses and a low whisper of a voice. "I just heard that some kids went missing," Ben murmured. I shrugged. "I don't watch TV," I said. "The news is all bullshit anyway. They only show you the bad stuff. After all, no one wants to hear about new breakthroughs in fusion technology or discoveries in particle physics. Instead, people just want to watch others get murdered, robbed and beaten so that they can feel that at least someone else has it worse than them. That's all the news is really, a form of schadenfreude, the joy people get from seeing others' misfortune and suffering. Our entire media industry is built on a foundation of schadenfreude." I took a long sip from my beer, a harpoon that tasted like pure raspberries. Iris rolled her eyes. "Well, probably true, I don't care," she said, turning her green eyes on me. "Don't you want to know what happened to the kids?" "I do," Ben said, leaning forward. "Was it something supernatural?" Iris gave a sardonic laugh at that. Ben sat back, offended. "What's so funny? I heard there was weird stuff going on around that factory. In fact, I heard they used to manufacture some dye there for clocks and stuff, right? So all these people went to work, painting watches and clocks and whatever else they told them to paint. It was this special green dye that would glow in the dark. The factory was staffed by mostly women, and I heard they used to lick their paintbrushes to form them into points. They figured this stuff was just regular paint that glowed in the dark." I leaned back, interested. Ben started talking faster, getting more animated. "So what happened?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. "Well, the workers started getting cancer and dying in huge numbers," Ben continued as the kitchen lights sparkled off his glasses. "One woman even had her entire jaw rot off. Others had pieces of their faces falling off. So it turns out, they were using radioactive isotopes to make the paint glow, and these women were just licking the paint brushes and touching the paint." "Holy shit," I whispered, horrified. "They called them the Radium Girls," Ben said. "That factory killed hundreds and hundreds of people. That's why a lot of people think it's haunted. People claim they see ghosts and weird shit around it. And that's not all. The case gets even weirder when you look at workers' families. It seems a lot of their kids went missing too. The cops never found any of them the entire time the factory was operational, and even after it shut down, the families of the workers kept having strange things happen. Children disappearing from their bedrooms in the middle of the night. Strange murders and unexplained suicides that kept killing off healthy, normal people all over town." "So, anyways," Iris continued, looking slightly annoyed at the interruption, The kids that went into that abandoned factory were all found, torn apart. Their limbs were all amputated and crooked. She leaned forward, using her spooky campfire voice, and the limbs were long, freakishly long, as if they had just grown overnight to inhuman lengths before they got lopped off. But they never found the heads or the torsos. All they found was 10 legs and 10 arms. And no one knows what happened? I asked. She shook her head. Officially, no. The police and media said it was some sort of serial killer, of course, but there wasn't a shred of evidence anywhere. It was like a ghost had done it. Where the limbs were piled up in the basement, there was no evidence that anyone had been there in months, no footsteps or microscopic evidence of any presence. But the story doesn't end there, because there were 6 teenagers that went into that building, and one of them was found alive 3 months later, wandering, covered in blood and scratches, mostly naked, and totally insane. One of my friends is an EMT, and she said that the kid would not stop talking about the crooked man taking his friends and keeping him prisoner in some other world. At the mention of those words, the crooked man, a chill went down my spine. My heart felt like ice. "What'd you say? What did the kid say?" I asked anxiously. Suddenly, the room felt very hot, and the alcohol was not sitting well in my stomach. "He said he got kidnapped by someone called the Crooked Man," Iris repeated, taking a long sip from her wine. "According to the kid, it was some sort of fucking monster apparently. I think his mind must have just snapped. He was probably kidnapped and held in the basement of some serial killer for 3 goddamn months. Who knows what he saw and experienced? People make up all sorts of crazy shit when they're traumatized." My hand was shaking so badly that I had to put my bottle down on the table. For some reason, my mind kept flashing back to my sister, Amelia, who had been kidnapped from her room in the middle of the night when my brother Benton and I were little. She had never been found. We had never gotten a ransom note or found a body. It was as if Amelia had simply disappeared, vanished from the surface of the planet in an instant. "I think some of that stuff is real," Ben said. "People have been talking about cryptids and ghosts for thousands of years, across countless different and unrelated cultures. What are the chances that all of them are just hallucinations or delusions?" I didn't know, but I thought I might know someone who might. My brother Benton was a long-term drug addict, living in a flop house. I went to see him the next morning. He opened the door with a glazed, half-aware expression. Scars covered his arms and legs. He looked like a walking skeleton. His eyes shone like the last bit of water at the bottom of a dying well. "Jack," he said, surprised, appearing to wake up slightly. "What are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you," I said, pushing past him into the one-bedroom place he called home. A cockroach skittered across the wall. As he closed the door, I saw bites from bedbugs all over his body. Benton turned, spreading out his hands. "Well, what is it, little brother? You know I'm all ears." "You remember that rhyme you used to scare me with when we were little?" I asked. "That rhyme you made up about the Crooked Man?" He seemed to go a shade paler. "I didn't make anything up," he said. "That rhyme came from Grandma. She told it to Dad when he was little, before she died." "Grandma?" I asked, startled. "Our grandmother had died of cancer when she was extremely young, in her late 20s. Did you hear about the murders over in Union? The survivor was talking about the Crooked Man." "That's pretty freaking weird, man," he said. "Especially considering what happened to Grandma and Amelia, you know." He sat down on the threadbare mattress, laying back and sighing. "Why is it weird?" I asked. "Because, you know, that's where Grandma used to work. At that factory in Union. Didn't Dad ever tell you?" I shook my head, feeling sick. "So Grandma was one of the Radium girls," I said. My brother shrugged his thin shoulders, the stained t-shirt clinging tight to his frail body. "I don't know what that is, but whatever she was doing there, it killed her." "But what does that have to do with Amelia?" I asked, my heart pounding at the mention of our long-lost little sister. He shook his head in wonder. "You don't remember. You were older than me when it happened. Before she went missing, she kept talking about the same thing, saying weird stuff about some crooked man. Don't you remember what happened the night she went missing?" I thought back, but it all seemed like a blur. I remembered flashing police sirens and my parents screaming. I had tried to block it out, but apparently Benton hadn't been able to. That night must be like a fresh wound on his mind all the time. No, I just remembered. Screaming and police. I whispered, my voice trailing off into nothing. Benton leaned forward on the bed, looking sick. We both saw it, he said. The crooked man. That thing she was talking about. It was real. We saw it in her room that night. When it took her, I shook my head, refusing to look at him. Feeling sick, I walked toward the door without looking back. Where are you going? I'm going home, I said. I can't deal with this shit right now. But that night, I would find out that the long-lost nightmare from my childhood was not nearly as buried in the past as I thought. I was laying in my dark bedroom, reading the local news on my phone, when I saw an article that disturbed me greatly. I sat up, looking out the window into the cloudless night. The sky hung overhead like a black hole, colorless and empty. Fear radiated through my heart as I glanced back down at the screen and started reading. Sole survivor of serial killer commits suicide. The article read in garish black and white letters. Michael Galantino, 18, was found dead in a psychiatric facility early this morning. In February, Michael Galantino and 5 others entered a local abandoned building. Friends who knew them stated that they often explored abandoned structures as part of an urban exploration group. But this would not be a normal night for the group. They all disappeared, and within 24 hours, police and search teams had been dispatched to look for the missing teenagers. The house was silent. I read the rest of the article with bated breath, my eyes wide. Some of the details I already knew, but others, such as the radioactive isotopes found on the dismembered limbs of the victims, I did not. I wondered about that. The police claimed that, after finding this strange clue, they had sent a team to inspect the abandoned factory with Geiger counters and look for signs of radioactivity. Perhaps the radium, which had a notoriously long half-life, had accumulated on the surfaces over the decades. But they said the radioactivity within the building was all within acceptable levels. It was just another bizarre piece of a puzzle that no one could solve. The house was deathly silent. I could hear my own heart beating a runaway rhythm in my ears. A rising sense of anxiety was filling me, but I didn't know why. It felt like some sort of pressure had changed all around me, as if the first wave of a massive blizzard had just blown into the room. I heard a creaking from across the dark room. At the same time, I felt a sting on my arm. I looked down, seeing a bedbug crawling across my skin, a small red welt rising in its wake. Fuck, I swore, grabbing it between my fingers and slicing it between my nails. Crimson spurted from its swollen body as if it were a tiny balloon. It exploded, staining my fingers red with my own blood. I should have never gone to see my brother, goddamn bedbugs, I muttered to myself. I hope that was the only one. If I had picked up some extra travelers at the flop house, I knew they would spread throughout the entire house within days. The creaking came again, louder this time, almost insistent. I glanced across the curtain of shadows that hung thick and black in the room, seeing the dark silhouette of my closet door swinging open. I could only stare, open-mouthed. A long moment passed, and then I heard breathing. It came out, ragged and slow with long pauses, like the choking of a murder victim. Slowly, I raised my phone's dim light, shining it across the room. On the closet door, I saw 4 inhumanly long, crooked fingers. They shone pale like the skin of a corpse. They twitched, then started rhythmically tapping on the door. And then I heard it, that rhyme, that horrible, gurgling rhyme. It came echoing out from the door in that same choked voice, like a forgotten wound from long ago. The crooked man watches you. His eyes are black, his lips are blue. It felt like I was in some sort of nightmare, but I knew from the sweat dripping down my forehead and the sensation of cloth sheets against my skin that this was all too real. Even a couple months later, I still remember that sensation of dread, the first of many terrors that this night would bring. I looked around for a weapon. All I found was a letter opener sitting next to some mail on the nearby nightstand. I grabbed it, a flimsy piece of metal in my shaking hands. I was afraid to move, afraid to call out or do anything, out of fear it might shatter the stillness and cause that ineffable horror to come oozing out. I knew I didn't want to see what was hiding behind that door. I looked at the open window. I was on the 2nd floor. I was afraid to even breathe too loudly at that moment. With the letter opener in my hand, I tried to silently slide myself across the mattress to the window only a few feet away. The bed frame groaned softly as I shifted my weight. The breathing from the closet stopped abruptly. I heard the door creaking open, the floorboards shifting. Heavy steps started in the darkness, heading towards me. As I pushed myself off the bed, I glanced back and saw something twisted loping across the room on crooked legs. It was the crooked man, the nightmare from my childhood. He towered over me with a top hat that nearly scraped the ceiling. His lidless eyes were pure darkness, as black as death. They contrasted heavily with his bone-white skin. His lips and fingernails were a suffocating, cyanotic blue, like the lips of a murder victim. He stood up tall. The bones in his freakishly long legs cracked as the many strange joints of his enormous limbs bent in ways no human limb should bend. His fingers were strange and misshapen, each a foot long. They ended in sharp points of bone that poked out through the dead, white skin. He wore a black suit on his tall, emaciated frame. He moved towards me like flashing static, seeming to disappear and reappear closer and closer in every moment. In panic and terror, I dived headfirst toward the open window, hearing the gurgling breathing of the crooked man only a few feet behind me. I felt slashing talons of bone rip across my back, a burning pain and a feeling of blood soaking my shirt. Then I was flying out the window and falling headfirst towards the grass and bushes below. Time seemed to slow down as the ground rushed up to meet me. The wind whipped past my ears like the currents of a tornado. Instinctively, I tried to curl into a ball. As I smashed into the first of the bushes under my window, I rolled to try to put the brunt of the impact on my right shoulder. The thin branches of the bush crumpled under me like wet cardboard. I felt sharp sticks stabbing into my skin, opening up new slices and cuts to mix with the deep gashes on my back. I hit the dirt hard, a sudden pain radiating through my back. A jarring sensation crashed through my body. I rolled as I hit the ground, smacking my head into the lawn. The world spun around me and went dark. Suddenly, I was somewhere else. I found myself standing in a dark factory, surrounded by debris. Broken glass covered the floor, twinkling like fireflies under the light of the distant streetlights outside. Strange graffiti covered the concrete walls all around me. "Don't look behind you," one of the tags read in slashing red letters. Underneath it, someone had spray-painted pure black eyes over a massive grinning mouth full of crooked black teeth. "Destroy it with fire. Save your soul," another one read in small, blue letters. I ran my hands over my face, wondering if I was dreaming. This all felt so real. I could feel the gentle breeze blowing through the broken windows on my skin, hear the rhythmic chirping of crickets outside. I heard soft sobbing behind me. I remembered the first graffiti tag I had seen, and a sense of panic gripped my heart. I did not want to look back. "Fuck," I swore under my breath, trembling as I turned. But I didn't find some eldritch monstrosity with obsidian teeth and black, lidless eyes waiting there. Instead, I found a woman. She was crying, her back turned to me. She wore a black funeral gown that looked ancient and decayed. With a trembling heart, I took a step forward, wondering if I would regret this. "Hello," I called out. She spun, her eyes widening. In front of me stood a pretty blonde woman in her mid-20s, one that I immediately recognized. For I saw many of my own features reflected in that panicked face, the high cheekbones, the large chin, even the waviness of her hair. "Grandma," I whispered, looking around in wonder. "What is this? Am I dead?" She shook her head, her eyes still wet and red. She took a deep, shuddering breath and gave a faint smile. "Jack," she said in a soft, melodic voice, "I'm so happy to see you. I've been watching you. I've been so proud of you. Even though we never met, I want you to know that. I wished I could have lived longer, could have met you. If only I hadn't been murdered by that thing." She spat the last word with hatred and fear oozing from her voice. "I thought you died of cancer, Grandma," I asked. "What do you mean, he killed you?" She shook like a leaf in the wind, refusing to meet my gaze. "Everyone in that place was touched by something evil," she murmured, putting her face in her hands. Her voice quavered like a frightened little girl's. "The sickness radiated from that thing. It followed us like a cancer, made us weak, and then took our breath away. After the long torture was finished, he came to strangle me. He didn't just kill me, Jack. He murdered my sister and brother too. I saw it." Her head ratcheted up, looking behind me all of a sudden. Her eyes widened in terror. "You need to kill it, Jack," she whispered grimly. "He's woken up again after all these years, and he's starving. The crooked man must feed, and feed he will if you don't stop him. You need to come to the factory and end it, otherwise he will keep on killing. The crooked man will never stop hunting you. He will kill you and everyone you love." "How?" I asked, afraid to look back as the disturbing sounds grew closer and closer. Grandma backpedaled quickly, as if the demons of hell were approaching. How do I end it?" I heard a horrible choked breathing behind me, then the world faded. I woke up suddenly on the lawn, my head pounding. It didn't seem like much time had passed. I must have knocked myself out. I raised my fingers to my forehead. My fingers came away slick with blood. For a long moment I lay there, hyperventilating and looking up at the cloudless abyss of a sky. My body felt bruised and battered, and I wasn't even sure if I could walk. Then I saw a pale, hairless visage peeking over the edge of the windowsill, with eyes as dark as night. Its face split into a grin with a crack, making a sound like ripping plastic. The bone-white mask of dead skin looked at me with a feverish intensity, a kind of psychopathic hunger that radiated from every pore of his body. With horror, I saw the crooked man's teeth were as black as his eyes, gleaming like polished jetstone. A rush of adrenaline pushed me up from the ground. I realized I was tremendously lucky that I had been laying there with my keys still in my pocket and my cell phone in hand, fully dressed except for the fact I was wearing slippers. I sprinted across the lawn towards my car. I heard the crooked man scream out after me. "You'll be with grandmother soon, Jackie boy," he hissed in his gurgling voice. "No one escapes, no one." I flew down the highway in my car, the phone in my trembling hand. Looking down at it, I called Iris right away. She answered groggily. "Hello," she said. "Jesus, Iris, it's after me," I said frantically. "Something's happening. I got attacked in my own bedroom." "Did you call the cops?" she asked, seeming to wake up instantly. I looked down at the clock in the center console, seeing it was already past midnight. It wasn't a person. I saw something. I think it was the same thing that took those teenagers, and now it's after me. Are you guys home? There was a long pause on the other end. I heard whispering in the background. "Yeah, sure, come over," she said. I knew Ben was somewhat of a gun nut and had a nice little collection at the house. I would feel much safer if I made it there, and if I had them on my side, that would be all the better. Ben and Iris lived in the middle of a back road surrounded by forests. The dark trees loomed overhead like priests with their heads bowed. The light from their front porch streamed into the creeping shadows as I pulled into their driveway. The sound of the car idling seemed far too loud in this place where the woods closed in all around me. I didn't know what was hiding in those trees. I immediately shut it off. Ben was a veteran who knew much more about combat and guns than I did. His collection was also somewhat impressive. An Armalite AR-15, a Judge, a 12-gauge Benelli, 2 crappy little .22s, a .45 Ruger, a Nosler 21, and a 10-gauge Mossberg. I had gone out shooting with him and Iris quite a few times. I would feel much safer once I was inside. The cloudless black sky hung overhead like the lid of a coffin. Their little 2-story place with the wraparound porch looked quaint, almost like a little rural cabin. I stumbled out of the car. I'm sure I was quite a sight, battered and covered in clotting gashes and cuts, my eyes wide and panicked. I constantly looked around, checking my back. Every time I did, I expected to see something there, something close by with blue lips like a corpse and deformed, twisting bones. I had nearly gotten to the front of the house when I saw, through the narrow side lights at top of the door, the face of the crooked man. Standing only feet away, I heard faint gurgling of his diseased breathing even through the wall. His hairless face was split into a grin like a death's head, his lidless eyes bulging and excited. He raised his misshapen fingers to the window and gave me a little wave, opening and closing his fingers slowly. Then he turned and disappeared deeper into the house. I immediately tried opening the door to yell to Iris and Ben to watch out, but the door was locked. I called Iris. Each ring seemed to take an eternity. Finally, she answered. "Hello, what? Are you here?" she asked. "Iris, get the fuck out of the house. You and Ben aren't alone in there. There's a man coming in your direction right now," I screamed, panicked. "Jump out the window if you have to. It's coming." "What?" she said, sounding alarmed and confused. "Are you being serious?" I heard soft murmuring in the background. "Tell Ben to grab a gun right now," I started to say, but a high-pitched scream carried through the phone in the house at that moment. "Iris, Iris, answer me," I said. The call immediately went dead. From inside, I heard the first of the gunshots. At that point, I decided to run back to my car. I needed to get inside and help them. A small voice in the back of my mind asked me what I could possibly do. However, if an AR-15 or a lead slug from a 12 gauge couldn't stop the crooked man, then what could? At that moment, I wished fervently that Grandma would have told me. I grabbed a tire iron from the back of my trunk and sprinted back toward the front of the house. They had large windows leading into the kitchen from their wraparound porch. Without hesitation, I drew the tire iron back and smashed it. The tinkling of glass seemed explosively loud. I realized that the gunshots and screaming had stopped. At that moment, something pale came scurrying around the side of the building. I jumped, but I looked over and realized it was Iris, dressed in a white hoodie and white pants. Her pale face was contorted with mortal terror. To my horror, I realized hundreds of small drops spattered her clothes, covering her face and body like crimson raindrops. She had the .45 Ruger in her hands and she was limping. "Where's Ben?" I cried. She shook her head. I jumped out the bedroom window. "He was behind me," she said. Suddenly, there was another explosion of glass from behind the house. Something heavy thudded hard against the ground. We heard wretched wailing follow it. Looking at each other with horrified eyes, we both turned and ran towards the noise. We found Ben laying on the lawn. The right side of his neck was nearly severed. Bright red streams of blood spurted from the mutilated flesh. His back looked broken as well. He laid there like a hornet smashed under someone's boot. With dilated eyes, he looked from me to Iris. Terror and agony oozed from his eyes. He opened his mouth to say something, but only a frothy puddle of blood came up. Then his eyes turned away, looking straight up into the cloudless black void of a sky. The last exhalation came, the death gasp that bubbled and stretched out until I thought it might never end. He died staring into that abyss, that eternity from which no one returns. I grabbed Iris and pulled her toward the car. She stood like a statue, resistant and unmoving. "Iris, we need to go," I hissed. She seemed to wake up then, looking at me. Then she looked past me, her eyes glancing up and widening with horror. I turned, seeing the crooked man peering down from the upstairs window, his top hat balanced on his alien skull, a grin of sadistic glee marring his face. "We need to leave," I repeated, pulling her. She came willingly. We stumbled away from the corpse of Ben. The crooked man's black eyes followed us like cameras. I got her in the car and peeled out of there. Every time I closed my eyes though, even just to blink, I would catch a glimpse of the crooked man's smiling visage. "Where are we going?" Iris called. "We need to call the cops. My phone is upstairs on the floor somewhere." "The cops aren't going to help us," I said. "That thing isn't human. It can go wherever it wants apparently. You think a police station would protect us? The cops would leave for a few minutes and come back to find us dead. We need to end this. We need to go to the abandoned factory." "The abandoned factory?" Iris asked, confused. I told her the story, everything that had happened up to that point, even the vision of my grandmother. "That's fucking nuts," Iris muttered. "This whole thing is crazy. There's no way there's actually such a thing as a crooked man. Shit like that doesn't happen in real life. It's gotta be a serial killer in some sort of weird costume." "You know it's not," I answered. "You saw that thing. That's no mask." I sped on the highway at 100 miles an hour toward Union, toward the abandoned factory where this had all started so many years ago. As we pulled into the cracked lot surrounding the old, run-down building, a sense of overwhelming dread crashed through my chest. I felt like I was stuck in some cyclical nightmare from which it was impossible to wake up. I pulled out a cigarette and lighter from my cup holder and lit it. Iris gave me a strange look. "This is probably my last cigarette," I said. "Might as well enjoy it." Iris didn't say anything, her dilated eyes simply flicking around randomly. She looked like she was still partially in shock. Slowly, she got out of the car, limping across the parking lot by my side. "I hurt my ankle when I jumped from the window," she said. "I don't think I'm going to be doing much running. It feels swollen." I'm just glad you still have the .45, I said. Though I wish you had grabbed the AR, she shook her head. Ben shot that thing with a 10-gauge shotgun in the chest. With a slug, she said. It didn't work. The pistol might slow it down, but it's not going to kill it. We need to find another way. I remembered the graffiti in the factory. Destroy it with fire. Save your soul. We found a threshold in the back where the door was totally knocked off the hinges. It lay on top of crunching shards of glass and layers of thick dust. Old rectangular tables were still nailed into the wooden floor, their surfaces pockmarked and covered in grime. Most of the windows had giant, spiderwebbing cracks running through the glass, though some were just smashed entirely. I had never been here, but as I walked further in, I realized it was exactly the same as I had seen in my vision with my grandmother. Even the same graffiti was there. "Don't look behind you," was splayed across the wall in giant letters. "Fuck, this place is creepy," Iris whispered. She held the Ruger clenched tightly in her hand, her knuckles white. "Where do we go?" "I'm not sure," I said. "I think we're supposed to burn something. Maybe we should just burn down the whole factory." Iris gave me a funny look. "That's your plan? Lighting an abandoned building on fire?" she asked with an expression of grave concern. "Let's look around," I said. "Maybe we're supposed to find something." We descended deeper into the factory, through more identical rooms that looked like they were from the apocalypse. At the end, I found old, concrete steps leading down into the pitch-black basement. I pulled out my cell phone, shining the LED light down the steps. Iris gave me a worried look. "Let's go," I whispered grimly. I felt watched here, even more than at Iris's house. I knew the crooked man was near, biding his time, playing with his food like a cat with a mouse. The steps led into a concrete boiler room with ancient, rusted machinery still welded into the floor. All over the dark walls, someone had spray-painted pictures of extended, contorted arms and limbs with fingers like talons. There was a smell down here, too, a smell like rotting bodies. As we got to the center, I heard crying behind us. I turned to see my grandmother, pale and ghostly, crying into her hands. "Grandma," I whispered. Iris looked at me confused. "Who are you talking to?" she asked. I shook my head. My grandmother looked up at me, fresh tears in her ghostly eyes. "Jack, you need to burn it," my grandmother said with a quaver in her voice. "The corpse of the owner, the one who killed us all, it's hidden in the surge pump. We came together to end it, to end the deaths, but it didn't stop it. Somehow, he's still connected to this world through that body. It's been in there, festering like an open wound for who knows how long." I looked at the surge pump across the room. Iris could apparently neither see nor hear my grandmother. "It's in there," I murmured, pointing at the pump. "We need to burn the body hidden in there." The surge pump had valves and a giant wheel at the end. It was a horizontal cylinder that looked just big enough to stuff a man's body into. The rusted pipes grew smaller as they crawled up the wall. I put my hands on the rusted wheel and turned. It looked like something from a submarine door. With a squeal of tortured metal, the surge pump began opening. It was difficult going. Iris came and put her small body behind it, and I felt it turning faster. How are we going to burn it though? I asked myself, grunting through the effort. Looking behind the surge pump, I found the answer. A fairly fresh dead body lay there, hidden under the metal of the surge pump, holding a small can of gasoline. It looked like a young man in his 20s with dark hair and tanned skin. His arms and legs had been ripped off, and now only a decomposing torso and head remained. "Another victim of the crooked man?" Iris asked. He was so close. I wondered, at that moment, how many others had been drawn here, how many victims the crooked man was hunting. I grabbed the gasoline. I heard a skittering of feet behind us. Iris backpedaled and gave a horrified scream. In terror, I looked behind us and saw the crooked man, flanked by the transformed bodies of 7 children. Their arms and legs had all grown inhumanly long, bending in strange places like crooked stalks. Their faces had become like the crooked man's, their eyes black and lips blue, their teeth long and dark, their movements jerky and eerie. Iris raised the Ruger. In that concrete tomb, the gunshots reverberated like exploding missiles, deafening me. With waves of adrenaline shaking every muscle in my body, I swung the end of the surge pump open. Stuffed into the narrow metal steel tube, I saw a mummified corpse covered in tattered rags. Its grinning skull was a mass of cobwebs and dead insects. I unscrewed and overturned the gas can, then pushed it quickly into the tunnel. It just fit through the narrow enclosure. The gunshots ended as abruptly as they had started. Beside me, Iris was still frantically pulling the trigger, her face a broken mask of shell shock. I dared not look back as I pulled the lighter out and flicked it. With my ears ringing from the gunshots still, I couldn't hear a thing, though the ringing had started to slowly fade. A wave of cold, dead flesh crashed into my back. I went flying forward. Next to me, Iris threw the empty pistol at the nearest of the transformed children. It smacked the boy in the head with a dull crack, but his black, lidless eyes never looked away. As I fell, the lighter touched the edge of the surge pump. A few drops of gas ignited, sizzling and dripping in liquid flames. After what felt like an eternal moment, the rest of it lit up with a whoomp and a flash of burning heat. The crooked man started wailing, a tortured, diseased wailing that seemed like it had the voices of many screaming children mixed in with it. I knocked hard to the ground, slamming my head against the concrete floor. 4 of the children used their bent, stick-like arms to gingerly pull the burning mummy out of the metal tomb, their claws talons of fingers grabbing the burning flesh without hesitation. On the other side of the room, the form of the crooked man started to blacken and drip as his mummy did the same. Next to me, a transformed girl in blood-stained rags held Iris' arms tightly behind her back. Iris gave a scream of pain. I saw the demonic girl biting at Iris's neck and shoulders over and over with her long, black teeth, ripping off strips of bloody skin and muscle between her blue, dead lips. She grinned as she bit and chewed. Iris struggled like a woman being burned alive, but the superhuman strength of the girl held Iris's wrists pinned together behind her back with an iron grip. With the sound of hissing flames and shrieking echoing all around me, I watched as the children laid the burning body of the crooked man gingerly on the concrete floor. One by one, they laid down on it, smothering the fire with their own pale bodies. The flames continued to whip and flicker for a long moment. The children's bodies caught on fire, their white skin blackening and cooking. Even as they burned though, the fire on the crooked man's body had started to die down, and the mummified corpse wasn't even most of the way burned yet. No, I wailed, a sense of deep loss ripping its way through my heart. I saw Iris too, her entire body covered in blood. Her white clothes turned ruby red with blood and gore. She had stopped screaming and struggling by this point, even as the girl leaned forward and ripped her left ear off with her predatory teeth. The flesh gave a sickening tearing sound as it came off. Iris's eyes rolled up in her head, showing only the whites as her teeth chattered. The demonic girl laughed and pushed the limp form of Iris forward. Her still body spurted blood from dozens of deep gashes. Her legs and arms twitched as if she were seizing. I found myself alone with these abominations. The crooked man's screaming stopped suddenly. He stepped forward, his bleached white skin blackened and peeling now. His clothes had nearly burned off, and his top hat stood as a smoldering pile of ashes. Yet he still moved fast, seeming to disappear and reappear closer and closer, his misshapen legs jerkily skittering to the left and right in rhythmic cracks. Then he was standing over me, a pillar of burnt skin and insanity. With his sharp fingers, he reached down and grabbed me. I blacked out at that moment, and merciful oblivion took over my mind. I don't remember much of the next couple months. I woke up in some strange, otherworldly city where the sky rained fire and corpses hung from lampposts all down the street. Empty skyscrapers filled with skeletons and spiderwebs stretched around me, seemingly forever. I could see no end to the city in any direction, even from the top of the highest buildings. The world there was always dark, the sky always black and cloudless as drops of burning flame fell from it, searing me whenever I tried to go outside. I wandered there constantly, the crooked man always behind me. As I wasted away in that land of shadows, he grew stronger, his body healing slowly. I felt something vital and deep within my heart drained more and more, day by day, until I was no more than a walking skeleton clad in rags, hopeless and insane. After what felt like an eternity of endless nights in that place, waking up to see the crooked man grinning over me, it abruptly changed. One day, I woke up at the edge of some woods in a light drizzle, the rain soaking my threadbare clothes. My emaciated body shivered constantly. I started crawling out to find help. With the last of my strength, I pushed myself off the ground. Behind me, I heard a gurgling voice ringing out from every tree. "I'll be with you until the end, Jack. I need you just as you need me, for the more who know my story, the more fear will spread, and I will be able to come into their homes next. For this, you must live, but I will always be watching you, and soon we will be reunited. To me, you must always return." A driver found me wandering the roads, shell-shocked and half-mad. About 20 minutes later, the police came, surprised to see me still alive. Apparently, I had been missing for over 2 months. They had found the bodies of Iris and Ben, and assumed that I had been abducted and killed by the same serial killer. I tried to explain the true story over and over to anyone who would listen, but they simply gave me sickening looks of pity and ordered an involuntary commitment to a psych ward. After a few days in the psych ward, they reluctantly released me. No one believed a word I had said. The cops thought it was some sort of mass psychosis, I'm sure. Some urban legend that delusional idiots had come to believe was real. But I know it was real. I know my days are numbered. It might look like a suicide or a murder or an accident, but in the end, the crooked man always comes back and takes what's his.